Quiet Elko Road was filled with sirens Sunday morning. A 911 call around 9:30 led investigators to 60-year-old Deborah Seidenfaden. She was found dead inside her RV.
It was a quiet Sunday morning in Elko, Georgia, when a frantic 911 call shattered the calm. A neighbour reported that his elderly neighbour, 79-year-old Harold Seidenfaden, had stormed into his yard covered in blood, muttering about an argument with his wife that might have gone too far. He walked straight into the man's kitchen, sat down calmly, and waited for police. To the neighbour's horror, Harold admitted his wife was hurt, maybe even dead. When deputies from the Houston County Sheriff's Office arrived, the scene was surreal. Harold looked frail, soft-spoken, and harmless, like any other aging man from the neighbourhood. But appearances can deceive. His hands, his clothes, everything was smeared with blood. The officers didn't yet know what they were walking into, whether there was a weapon hidden, whether another victim was inside, or whether Harold himself was a danger. The deputies moved quickly, treating every person on the property as a possible suspect. They learned Harold lived in a small camper behind his neighbour's home. According to him, his wife Deborah was inside. She was a good woman, he said, but they had fought. At first, Harold spoke in circles, his tone oddly calm for a man soaked in blood. Then he let it slip. Deborah was gone. She was dead. The officers realised immediately that this was no ordinary welfare check. This was a homicide scene. Somewhere in that trailer lay the body of a woman who just hours earlier had been alive and arguing with her husband. Now, you have to understand how things got here. Harold wasn't just some monster waiting to strike. He was a 79-year-old man whose body had been betraying him for years. He had already endured one painful surgery, and now doctors were pushing him toward another operation on his shoulder. It had torn badly, and he struggled to eat, drink, even lift his arm without agony. He claimed he had gone days without proper food because he physically couldn't manage it. At the same time, Deborah, his wife, was pushing him to go through with the procedure. To her, it was necessary, maybe even life-saving. But to Harold, it felt like torture. He described feeling worn down by the pressure, nagged by the woman who had always stood by him, until something inside of him finally snapped. On the morning of February 7th, instead of preparing for another surgery, Harold turned on the one person closest to him. The argument spiraled out of control, and in the chaos of pain, fear, and resentment, he murdered Deborah. It wasn't quick, it wasn't clean, and afterward Harold didn't run. Instead, he walked straight to his neighbour's house, blood dripping down his shirt, and confessed without hesitation. Officers knew Harold had admitted something terrible, but they couldn't simply take his word for it. For all they knew, he might have been lying, confused, or even trying to set them up. They moved cautiously toward the trailer where Harold and his wife had lived. Harold, almost eerily calm, directed them with instructions. He told them she was in the back room under a blanket. The deputies stepped carefully through the small space, clearing each area to make sure no one was hiding inside. The camper was cramped, just a living room leading into a narrow backspace, and every shadow felt heavy. But when they searched the back, there was nothing. No body, no blood, nothing to confirm his story. It was unsettling. Harold had been so matter-of-fact, and yet there was no sign of Deborah. Frustrated, the officers decided to widen their search. They circled around the trailer, checking the perimeter, until one of them re-entered and pulled back the blankets on the bed. And there she was, Deborah Seidenfaden. She had been lying in front of them the entire time, hidden under the covers. There was no saving her. It was far too late. In that chilling moment, the weight of Harold's confession became undeniable. He had killed his own wife, and while his demeanour was frail and almost pitiful, the reality of what he had done was brutally clear. With Deborah gone and Harold in custody, investigators turned to the witnesses on the scene to piece together what had led to this tragedy. The first was Harold's neighbour, the man who had made the frantic 911 call.
Emergency.
My neighbor, he just came up through my yard, all covered in blood. I guess what he's saying is he and his wife had a big argument, and he might have killed her.
Okay, what's the address, sir?
It's 2356 Elko Road.
All right, and do you know where he is right now?
Yeah, he just walked into my house. He's sitting in the kitchen.
Does he have any weapons on him?
Oh, I found a knife, but she took it from him.
He explained how Harold had shown up at his house that morning, covered in blood, asking strange questions and even begging him to shoot him. The neighbour's wife backed up the story, recalling how Harold had stumbled inside, his hands bleeding, before sitting quietly in their kitchen. She said she tried to clean some of his wounds, but otherwise left everything untouched, knowing something terrible had happened. Finally, officers spoke with Harold's boss, the property owner, who revealed the darker backdrop of Harold's life. He said Harold had been spiralling for months, weighed down by constant pain and worsening health. He'd heard Harold ramble before, talking about how he couldn't take it anymore, how his wife was pushing him into another surgery he didn't want. According to him, Harold seemed broken down and desperate, almost as if killing Deborah had been his way of escaping. Not just her, but the unbearable suffering he had been living through. Once Harold was transported to the hospital, officers stayed by his side to monitor him and preserve evidence. His bloodied clothes were collected, and while nurses tended to his wounds, Harold remained oddly calm, almost detached from the horror of what he'd just done. He rambled about his surgeries, how he hadn't been able to eat or drink for days, how doctors had failed him, and how Deborah kept pressuring him into another operation. In his mind, the weight of pain and the arguments about his health had pushed him past the breaking point.
Do what? They're working on getting you something that way you can use the bathroom. Yeah, we'll get that in just a second. They're gonna get you something to use the bathroom with, and then we'll get you out of that and get you clothes changed, okay?
Are you hearing any voices? Are you hearing any voices, anything like that? Right now?
Oh. You need to unplug this.
You hear me? Okay, not have any inner voices in your head.
Still wants to pull anything out.
Despite his fragile appearance, investigators treated him like what he was, a homicide suspect. They asked if he was hearing voices or experiencing confusion, but Harold was coherent enough, and his story didn't change. He had killed his wife because he couldn't face the surgery, the pain, or the pressure any longer. Eventually, Harold was deemed competent to stand trial. In November, the frail 79-year-old man stood before a judge facing charges of murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm. The verdict was clear: guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison, his remaining years to be spent behind bars. It was a tragic ending for both Harold and Deborah, an elderly couple whose final chapter ended not in peace, but in bloodshed, pain, and irreversible loss.
This is so shocking. William says his parents live right down the road from the RV.
They saw all the police cars out there on their way to church, but it's always unsettling when something like that happens in close proximity to you.